Good morning, everybody. How many of you remember pixie sticks? Pixie sticks are the straws that are filled with the tart and tangy powder, somewhat like Kool-Aid, and you pour it into your mouth and you get it all over your clothes, which is one reason that the moms didn't like them. But there's something that I fondly remember from my childhood, and they're still around. And they're also the basis of my first entrepreneurial venture. When I was in about 5th grade, I decided that if I bought a bag of pixie sticks for about 50 cents, and maybe there were 30 of them, and I divided them up and sold maybe 2 or 3 each for a quarter or 20 cents, I could make some money. And so I was well on my way to doing this when my favorite 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Perkins, said to me, Sharon, you can't do that on the school property. And I faced my first business rejection. Little did I know. So what does this have to do with the Legal Marketing Conference this year, which was held in Austin, Texas, 1,400 attendees, 17 countries, just a fabulous confab. What does this have to do? I wanted to illustrate some of the key points I found from the conference, and they weren't in any one session. And those points were, number one, how visual you have to be in terms of marketing and how powerful visuals have become. And you might say, yeah, Sharon, I know that, marketing is visual, and we all know that, but at the same time, I felt like the power of it at a conference like this was like opening the oven door and having the heat just blast in your face. That visual, as opposed to a text of PowerPoint bullet points, was what was breaking through the clutter. Personal. I think most of the sessions, I'm exaggerating, but not by much. It seemed like everybody, whether they were talking about marketing automation or whether they were talking about something personal, everybody showed a picture of themselves from childhood. They showed a picture of their school, whatever. They were really making it personal. And it definitely engrosses the audience. They're listening. They're not looking at their phones. And it really adds unique aspects. So I would say the personal aspect of a lot of these presentations came through. And they were all succinct, and they were powerful because they were succinct. They were to the point, they were attention-getting, and they kept your attention, and they didn't take advantage of your attention because in sense of trying to go along or trying to take more time than our minds have time for today. So let's go through some of the specific sessions. There was so much material, it's impossible to cover all of it. These are some of the highlights. I'm Sharon Berman. My company is Berbay Marketing and Public Relations, and we create the visibility and credibility that fuel revenue growth. Okay, one of the most enjoyable sessions was by Mary Knightlick. Mary is head of extreme marketing, and she gave a talk called TED Talks for Lawyers. Now, I know a lot of you have heard the phrase TED, but you may have seen a TED Talk and not realize you were seeing a TED Talk. TED stands for Technology, Entertainment, and Design, and was started in 1984. And it's a nonprofit organization that puts on the big TED conference. And then you've all heard of TEDx, or most likely you've heard of TEDx. TEDx are just the conferences that anybody can put on, which are other that use the TED technique, let's say. So you could have a day on employment law with the TEDx talks. So they're TED Talks, but it's just not TED sponsoring the organization. And she had a packed room. When I say packed room, it was like, okay, maybe half the size of a ballroom. She had a packed space for this. And she did a very good job of giving a TED Talk on how lawyers can give TED Talks. She first talked about the idea. The most important thing about a TED Talk is you have to have one idea. And the onus is on you to communicate it to the audience and to have the impact that you wanted to have. TED Talks are also very personal. There's a personal aspect. They should be 65% story and 25% data. What you're going for is an emotional and physical reaction. And I say that some of the talks that people gave definitely had that. They're short, maximum 18 minutes. A lot of TED Talks are 5 minutes, 6 minutes. They say an average maybe 12 to 18 minutes, but they're very short. They have, the images are very important. They're stark. A picture is worth 1,000 words. That's the kind of images that they show. They may have one word on a slide. Very graphic and telling the story through the images. One thing that really deters people from TED Talks is there's no hiding. You may have a podium, but and you may have notes that maybe you just sort of check once in a while, but that really is something that is not typical of a TED Talk. TED Talks, you've seen them. It's like a Steve Jobs sort of thing. You are there in front of the audience of thousands or 500 or 20, and there's no podium. You own the stage. You have memorized this talk, and you have rehearsed it over and over. You've sat in front of stood in front of your mirror, rehearsed your gestures. You've timed it. These people know these cold. And when you do it right, it can really be powerful, make you memorable, and all of which we want to lead to more business. And I would say, though, having the caveats are, having watched a couple of the TED Talks here, was, for example, she had a lawyer give a TED Talk after, an employment law attorney gave a TED Talk after Mary gave her TED Talk. And this lawyer did a fabulous job. You could tell how much work and rehearsal and everything went into it. But I didn't get her, maybe it was me, I didn't get her big idea until the last slide, until the last thing she said. And I thought, oh, is that what this is all about? So I think it's really important to make sure that you get that. You don't have to say this is what I'm going to talk about, but somehow communicate your top line in the beginning and make sure that your audience is understanding it. Two, I would say that you do need to be careful, because the keynote speaker gave, it was a TED type talk, but it was a keynote, so it was like an hour. And she was Diane O'Brien, who is the CMO of Chief Marketing Officer of Deloitte, and a very admirable, powerful woman that you say, oh my gosh, look at what she's accomplished. But what I remember from the talk was the personal aspects and what she's overcome personally. However, somebody described it as a motivating talk. I didn't find it that way. I didn't walk out feeling, oh, I'm gung-ho on marketing, let's get going. I really felt like there were two distinct parts of her talk. So you want to be careful in terms of melding them and what you want to say. But they can be, I would encourage anybody listening to encourage your lawyers or to try something like this. If you want to try it, I just think it's a great way to go. It's a lot more work than a deck of PowerPoints, but I thought it was just fabulous. Okay, now, Big Law wants to crush you like a bug. That's a very attention-getting title, right? And I would say this is really, it was about how smaller firms can fight back. And it went over the results of a survey by Michael Reinowesser and Jennifer Dezo of BTI Consulting Group. Most likely you're familiar with them. They do the surveys every year of law firms and big law. And what they talked about is that it's not that big law is big. I mean, yes, they're big. They have more resources than a smaller firm. But it's where they're focusing their money and their dollars. And they may be big, but they are also investing it in more superior client relationships. They also are focused. They invest more in fewer activities. And here is a slide that they showed. Big Law invests more to build superior client relationships. You'll see client development, AmLaw 30, 33.8%. If you look, I'm looking at outside AmLaw 200, the one on the far right, 28.3%. And if you look at events, the big firms are at 8.3, where smaller firms are at 17.5. And it's not that events don't work or don't bring in business, but you can tell where they are putting their money. It's in the client relationships. And how are they doing that? They're doing that by doing large-scale client feedback reviews and surveys. And I know a lot of you already do that, and you're probably saying, okay, we do that, and I'm sure you do. The key aspect of this is they were really used and acted upon. They really sometimes when the client satisfaction surveys are done, not everything is addressed after the survey. I mean, there's things that still need to be done. They focus on these intensely. Okay, client service metrics are extremely important. They're built into partner evaluations, partner objectives, partner compensation. So it's not just, oh yeah, we're doing some surveys, we want to see how clients like us, but it's really, this is something you're going to be measured on, and it's going to be meaningful to you. They develop custom multi-practice CLEs and briefings, which they tailor to specific clients or targets. So if they're targeting a large corporation, they're going to develop something that's going to be address exactly what's going on at that entity. So they really focus on developing very targeted presentations. They look at every client as a market of one. What does this client want? What's of value to this client? How do they want us to communicate with them? How do they want their invoices? They look at every client as a market of one, and they zero in on proven activities. This is talking about investing more in fewer activities, and you can see here on this chart that if you look in the upper, conversion success and importance to marketing strategy, you have client feedback and client proposals, everything client referrals, client teams, everything focused on the client as where they are putting their focus. Now, it's not that the other things aren't important because they're up in the upper quadrant here, but this is the big firms seeking to crush smaller firms like a bug are really putting their emphasis and differentiating themselves through client satisfaction and acting on that. Also, too, what do they ask? When they do client satisfaction surveys, they're asking different things, or they're delving deeper than some of the surveys that you typically see. They're asking how other law firms deliver value. When they're doing a survey with a client, how do other law firms deliver value? You've told us how we do, or hopefully, but how do they do it? What is the highest rates? What are the highest rates that you're paying any other firm? They'll ask that. They'll ask where they used other law firms and why, and what they're looking for, the opportunities left on the table, as well as what, where their competition is and where they need to fill some of the gaps. So I think the message here really is that you can fight back. I mean, you're not going to fight a huge law firm, but there are ways to fight back with their own tools, in a sense. Okay. Quantifying and driving the ROI in legal directories and award submissions. Okay, this is something very near and dear to everyone's heart. I'm sure if you've ever been doing any kind of nomination and going, is this worth it? This was by Ariel Lapiano of Paula Hastings and Ben Greenzweig of Momentum Events. They talked about how you can, they did a survey, first of all. Let me tell you, they did, I think, their own survey, and they surveyed the, Legal Marketing Association members and I think it's legal media professionals. And they did it again with BTI. And what they found regarding surveys was that 80% of firms plan to maintain or increase the number of submissions they're going to do this year. They found out that the average firm, and we're talking about larger firms, does 58 submissions a year. 18% of these larger firms have dedicated staff, and you really do. If you're going to do all of these, you really need to have a couple dedicated people. The average cost to develop it is $25.50. This seems low to me, and I'm going to guess that well, not guess. This has to be the hard cost, because in terms of time and effort, I'm sure it's a lot more. But average cost to develop, and 60% of the respondents said that their ROI is less than 5%. So everybody's doing these surveys, acknowledging that the ROI is very low, and sitting there asking themselves, why are we doing this? Is there a better way? And what they suggested, their suggestion was, number one, the ROI is really an impossible calculation. You know, how much business did we get from it? Because we'd be hard-pressed to find somebody who'd raise their hand and said, somebody saw me in super lawyers or benchmark litigation, and that's the reason they called me. Maybe it's after they got a referral and got your name and checked you out somewhere, but it's not the initial reason for the most part. They would encourage us, legal marketers, lawyers, administrators, to encourage a strategic discussion about these nominations. Not to stop doing them, but to be very strategic. Which ones do we really want to, which ones are really important to us? Where are we going to put our focus? And why are we doing it? If we do make the list, what is that going to mean to us? They want you to, suggesting measuring, which it's hard to measure in terms of the direct return, but measure how much time you're spending and manage how much time you're spending in terms of being selective, in terms of where your focus is. Develop a submission strategy. Once again, look at the overall universe of the submissions and then say, which ones do we really need to focus on? Which ones are going to be important in terms of our marketing, and not be, and who are we going to be submitting? Because that's when you listen to the panels of people from chambers or super lawyers or benchmark, what they always say is don't nominate 40 people from the firm. Okay, really be selective in who you are nominating. And also talk with your lawyers. Ask your lawyers what's important to you. Why do you want to be in this survey? Have clients mentioned it? That sort of thing. So check with them in terms of what it's really going to mean. It was interesting, they also found that the most important thing about these surveys when they talked to marketers was that it felt that getting on the list could improve internal morale. But when you ask lawyers, they felt that getting on the list was one of the top reasons to do it was buyer validation, that current clients would see they're on the list and say, hey, I made the right decision. They also thought it was important in recruiting. So we know how much time and effort is spent on these. I think if you develop a strategy, you're focused, life is a lot easier, and hopefully you'll get more results or at least less aggravation. Okay. All right, next. Marcy Krufka-Taylor from Mantra Partners, I sort of changed this. She did metrics and measurement, and I can't talk right now. Metrics and measurement. What can you measure? Because she called it your marketing scorecard, key factors for measuring ROI. We know how hard it is to measure marketing, but more and more, increasingly today, we can measure different aspects. So she talked about capturing capturing the information that would give you the metrics, but also looking at what those messages, the messages around them are. For example, she talked about client satisfaction surveys. Okay, you can measure that up and down in different ways, but what are the messages to the lawyers and to management? And some of the messages might be, okay, our clients are or they're not, they are or they are not satisfied. Here's what we do well. Here's where we need to do better. Here are our opportunities. And it also specific, what are the specific opportunities for cross-selling? Pitches and proposals. The messages, okay, you can, how many pitches did we do, how many proposals, what's our batting average, all of that. But some of the messages might be that we're winning a significant percentage of opportunities or we're losing, and here are the practice groups that are the most active. And I think what's really important is looking at, we do best with these types of pitches or proposals, and we're investing too much in others. So it's capturing the information, but not just having the data, but how do you translate it, and especially how do you translate it to management and to your lawyers. Okay, well, which can be both. Sorry. Events. Some of those, again, events, these are the practice groups that are most active. Here are some events possibly that have led directly to sales, or at least we can follow the dotted line. You can look at the value of that new work versus the cost of the event. And you can also say, hey, listen, we've been doing some of these events for a long time, but what are they bringing us? So measuring your events in terms of how many, the costs, attendees, that sort of thing. Of course, the website, Google Analytics, how many clicks. But looking at, for example, these practices or lawyers or industry teams receive the most traffic. You know, the way if you're doing heat maps or things like that, following the clicks, user behavior tells us these issues are most important to clients. We're not generating sufficient content for our website. So once again, it's the messages and for social media. So she talked a lot about what you can measure, and I think the most important part was talking about how to translate that and give it meaning so that you can act on it. All right. All right, this is one of the, this was a very interesting presentation. It was really a presentation where several smaller law firms talked about how they differentiated themselves. And this one, the firm is Reuter Ware in Wisconsin, and it's their agricultural marketing initiative. Reuter Ware has 40 attorneys in 2 offices in Milwaukee. They were founded in 1920. They're surrounded by a huge agricultural industry. And they were unknown by anybody in the industry, and they didn't know anybody in the industry. So they decided to pursue this market. And you'll see, I have to give them such credit for this investment and stick-to-itiveness. The first thing they did when they decided to pursue this, because it was a huge market dollar-wise, and they decided to pursue it, they had to overcome some resistance from some of the lawyers, because some lawyers just basically didn't want to get their shoes dirty in a sense. But once they had formed their team, they engaged a consultant, somebody who was retired. He wasn't a lawyer, somebody who had retired from the business but who knew a lot of people and who could make introductions. And some of the other things they did, it's not that they came up with, so the tactic was not a new tactic, but you'll see the fact is that they did that. And that's where, this is where the rubber meets the road, because in terms of industry focus, which I believe in tremendously, they were willing to put out the money. They were willing not to say, hey, it didn't work the first year, let's abandon it. They really stepped to it and continued the investment and modified. Now, and so here's what they spent. They estimate that they estimate that they brought in $200,000 at least in new work from that investment. So they identified the trade shows, and more importantly, they attended the trade shows. And their attorneys, people from the agricultural team, staffed the booths. They didn't send somebody who didn't know anything about it, the lawyers themselves actually staffed the booths. They attended the events. You know, they joined the trade associations, which a lot of firms do, but then they actually attended the events and networked. They published articles in agricultural journals and positioned themselves as experts. So it was their positioning in the industry, and it was also the patience and willingness to take time to let this build. And you'll see one of the things that they did is a very attention-getting ad in terms of what you might see in an agricultural publication. They were willing to make an investment in something like this. And so you have to give them a lot of credit. A lot of firms, I think, have so much opportunity in terms of industry focus, but just haven't put the packages together. And also, too, you may have, on our website is our webinar, talks about industry focus or niche focus, and switch to a niche. So you might, if you want to know more about that, it's on our website. Okay, one thing, just one last miscellaneous thing. I did not attend the presentation that had a general counsel on it, but some of the main buzz or main comment I heard from it was that one of the GCs said, listen, we want to meet your team. We're not dumb. We know that the senior partner is not doing all the work. We want to meet your team. Don't keep them hidden. And he was very vehement about this, so I wanted to pass that along. Okay, Next year's Legal Marketing Association, you can mark this on your calendars, March 27th to 30th. It's in Las Vegas, a lot closer to home. And also, too, if you're interested in hearing more of the sessions or all of the sessions, the audio will be available for purchase sometime in early May. So you can contact the Legal Marketing Association. And if you have questions, please, you have my email, you have my phone number. I'd be happy to talk with you further or give you more background on any of these. So thanks very much for listening. I look forward to talking with you next year.